You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Mish Shedlock, editor of Mish's Global Economic Trends Analysis. Welcome to the show, Mish.
Hey, pleasure to be on. Lots of events happening in Europe with Greece and Ukraine. Where do we want to start?
Well, it looks like Ukraine has fallen into Greece.
It's certainly fallen into trouble. I had picked up a rumor. Someone sent me an article in Ukrainian that I had to translate. I don't read Ukrainian very well. And it said that they were going to float their currency today. And I said, the black market rate, the official rate is like 16 to 1 with the U.S. dollar. But the black market rate was more like 21.5 to the dollar. And I said, you know what? I said if they float this thing, it might sink all the way as low to as 30 of a dollar. And it sunk to 25 to the dollar at one point today. It closed at 24 and change, down 45% on the day. And, of course, the IMF carpetbaggers are ready on hand here to lend a friendly little hand here to Ukraine.
So what does this tell us about the conflict there and the situation the people in Ukraine will find themselves in?
Well, they're running out of money. They're down to $6 billion worth of foreign exchange reserves. When they run out, they won't be able to buy anything they need, like food, energy, anything. So without a doubt, they're going to need some help from the IMF, but help from the IMF is a two-edged sword because these guys are going to go in and plunder the country. That's exactly what they do. Ukraine got itself in this mess, though, fighting needless wars, and they're still trying to fight this war, and people are fleeing the country. Tens of thousands of people who have just had enough of the war are actually crossing over into wherever they can go, Poland, wherever, but some of those borders to the north have been actually shut off. People are actually fleeing to Russia. So some of them might even come back to fight on the other side. So it's sheer madness. The country's ruined. I believe it's effectively split in two. For what? And I get accused of supporting Russia on this. Actually, I believe the U.S. fomented this war as a means to get NATO closer and closer and closer to the Russian border. And finally, Putin said no and took over Crimea as a result and is, without a doubt, backing the separatists. We can argue over how much and with what equipment, but without a doubt backing the separatists. So, here we are, and Ukraine is ruined. Greece has been effectively ruined, and that's the other interesting story. Both of them. Actually, there's an interesting story on Australia too. But in Greece, the prime minister and the economic minister are both, arguing with Germany about what can be paid back and what can't be paid back. The finance minister made a startling admission, and the truth is always startling when you hear a politician say it. He says, I'm the finance minister of a bankrupt country. And that admission is the first step, on the way to fixing the problem, because you can't fix a problem until you admit what it is. And all of this idea that we can extend and pretend and that things are okay and that Greece can pay back all of this debt, well, it's now on the table. Greece is saying that it can't, and Germany and the ECB is saying, well, we don't care whether you can, you're going to. the situation's rapidly coming to a head.
Well, is it going to be the old, you can't extract blood from a stone?
I think that's exactly it. And I likened it today in a post. I said it's the playground bully theory. And on the playground, you have, these bullies. Sometimes they gang up, and they pick on the weak and those they can get away with. And there's only 5 options. The bullies can have a sudden change of heart and voluntarily stop bullying. Well, bullies don't do that. The bullied party can just perpetually pay the bully's demands, whatever it is. Often it's give me your lunch money, give me a candy bar, give me your allowance money when you get it. I know what your allowance is. Don't try and hide it from me. The bully can join the gang. That's sometimes another option. The bullies and the bullied can agree to a truce on favorable terms to the bully, of course, or the bullied party finally says it's had enough, punches the bully in the mouth. And if the bully's a gang rather than one person, that can get you killed. Or the bully on the school playground can, go complain to the principal. Anyway, nothing really changes until number 5 happens. The bully party finally decides it's had enough. And that admission yesterday by Greece that we are bankrupt, well, that rules out option number 2. The bully continually paying the bully's demands. It can't. It's bankrupt. It, in this case, prohibits Greece from officially joining the gang on the gang's terms because the gang says, you're really not part of us unless you pay back every penny that you owed. And so here we are. And I'm hoping that Greece actually follows through with what they said and says, you know what, we're going to default. And if they do, they can do it 2 ways. They can go back, they can start a new currency or go back to the drachma, or they can also try and stay on the euro, which is what the Prime Minister has said that he wants to do. If he's really serious about that, he will actually have to start instituting some reforms and make sure that they run a current account surplus so that they have no monetary needs coming in from the outside. And if they can do that, it's actually at least technically feasible for them to stay on the euro. But, one way or another, that's going to require Syriza, the party to go back on some pledges. They won't be able to institute all of their leftist policies because that would immediately take them out of a current account surplus, would immediately mean they need money from somewhere. So, their option is to, if they decide to stick up to the bully, which way are they going to go? Will they keep their pledge to try and stay on the euro, or will they go back to the drachma? And either way, Germany's going to pay a price here, because either way, Greece is going to default.
Now, will that trigger a worldwide banking crisis, or will it stay stuck in Europe?
It would certainly trigger a European banking crisis, and if we look at how the stock market in the U.S. has been performing, every time that there's a little bit of a problem there's a hiccup, and then someone in Europe comes out and makes a statement and the market goes back up. But yeah, it could easily trigger a global crisis of some kind. And if it's only a European crisis and the euro, say, plunges, well, then how long does China put up with it? How long does China say, well, you know what? I don't like European products now being cheaper than ours because the euro plunged. And China is also eyeing Japan suspiciously here. The yen has fallen a huge amount over the course of the last year and a half or so, And Japanese exports are cheaper than Chinese exports in some cases. So we have this competitive currency debasement going on across the board, and it's spawning because stock markets are going up whenever currencies go down, huge bubbles in stock markets that are going to break. So eventually this is all tied together, and eventually there is going to be a global crisis as a result of it.
We'll have more with Mish Shedlock right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Mish Shedlock, editor of Mish's Global Economic Trend Analysis. Mish, China now has become the biggest investor worldwide, surpassing the West. Are they actively looking at things to acquire? I heard that English real estate is a huge thing for them right now.
Well, they certainly went into Canada in a big way. They went into L.A., San Diego, places on the entire west coast of the U.S., actually of the North American continent. So what that is a measure of more than anything recently is fear of crackdowns and reprisals in China, a crackdown on corruption. They're trying to get money out however they can, and they're trying to put it in tangible assets. There was a prominent case not too long ago, was it in Vancouver or Calgary along those lines. So I think that's what it's a reflection of. I don't think it's China per se, the country, trying to invest in foreign real estate. China, the country, is interested in more along the lines of mineral reserves, gas reserves, those kinds of things. So, but yeah, that's also part of the problem here of the imbalance in trade, of massive piles of foreign reserves built up, and the enabler of all of that was when Nixon took the U.S. Off the gold standard, and then there were no limits to central bank financing and no limits to federal deficit spending anywhere. So everything went out of control, and we're now bearing the fruits of that irresponsible action. Where the actual crisis starts, I don't know. It could be starting right now, and it could be in multiple places right now. In Japan, in the rising dollar and the consequences of the rising dollar, and even places like Australia that's been absolutely hammered over as an exporter over crushing declines in exports of iron ore, copper, etc. to China. So it's all interrelated here. And I don't know whether it starts in Japan or starts in Europe or starts in some place that's way off the everyone's radar. Greece actually was off everyone's radar until all of a sudden, out of blue, Syriza wins an election. And in Spain right now, we can look at the political party Podemos. These guys have come out and they're now in the lead, and just like what happened with Syriza in Greece, they're saying, we should exit the euro. So, and you have Marine Le Pen and the National Front Group in France saying the same thing. All of these things are a sign of stress. That's when these fringe parties take over and populist parties take over. It's just a sign of rising stress, of wages not keeping up with living expenses, and of the inane inflation policies of central banks that just flat out are not working.
Well, of course, they removed fuel and housing from the inflation index, saying they were too volatile to track. But once you take away fuel and housing, other factors really don't count. And I'm told the real inflation rate isn't 2% like the government says. It's closer to 9%.
Well, I don't believe it's 9. If you watch Shadow Stats or someone like that, they'll tell you it's 9. But I think a realistic way, first off, I don't even think we can measure it. There's no such thing as a uniform price basket that applies to everyone. But one of the things that they don't have in there that I believe they should is housing prices. And, especially in places like Canada, where housing prices have gone through the roof, and instead they're looking at the price of rent or something else, which has gone up but not up as much. That understates inflation. And of course, the entire stock market, money doesn't have to go into the price of food or the price of energy or the anything that price of consumer goods. It can also go into and has, increased speculation in financial assets and stocks. So I think that's where the bulk of the inflation is. Even if you look at things from a price standpoint, which I do, although I don't think that's a good measure of inflation, you'll see that, and the central banks will say, well, inflation is not really a problem. It's only 2% or 1% or whatever. The real problem is they've spawned another asset bubble, and when asset bubbles burst, all the loans made on those assets, and a very good example of this is the oil and natural gas industry that, that's been running, rampant here in the United States, drilling all these wells. All of a sudden, when the price of energy collapsed, these guys have no way of paying back this debt. So, the Fed actually, instead of alleviating the problem, always makes the problem worse by, fighting simple price deflation. They create asset bubbles and very destructive asset deflation because of all the loans that the banks have made on these assets, expecting them to forever go up in price. We just saw this with the housing bubble, and now we're seeing it play out again in the energy sector.
For the average person, what can they do to protect themselves if we have a banking crisis?
Well, the first thing to do is don't speculate in bubbles. So if you're in the stock market, get out. I think in the next financial crisis, and we're on the cusp of one here, it's probably already started actually, it would be good idea to have some money in gold. And third, people should protect. People should be prepared. What happens? This is very important, actually. What happens if someone loses their job for 12 months? The average person in the United States is living paycheck to paycheck, actually. Any loss of job, any loss of income, even some things like a major car breakdown, will cause people to borrow. Well, my gosh, what happens if they lose their job for 6 months? And when you lose one in these bad markets, you typically don't find one right away. So the number one thing that people need to do is just be prepared for the loss of a job, because if it happens, you don't want to be, squandering all of your, cashing out your IRA as prices are declining in that IRA. It's really a mess. So take some off the table and, have a cash cushion.
Mish, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Pleasure to be on the show, and the way to find me, just do a Google search for Mish, and pleasure to be on the show again, and I'll catch you in 7.
My guest has been Mish Shedlock, editor of Mish's Global Economic Trend Analysis. You're listening to HowStreet.com Radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.